would be an economic disaster. It would be a national security disaster if we lost the case in the Supreme Court.
Donald Trump is now publicly warning against the Supreme Court as a major showdown unfolds in Washington. President Donald Trump is now warning of a $3 trillion devastation if the Supreme Court rules against his tariff authority. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said that if the court forces the government to unwind his tariffs, the total impact would be, in his words, in excess of $3 trillion. He said that includes investments linked to the tariffs, repayments, and the broader fallout of undoing his trade actions. Trump called it an insurmountable national security event and claimed such a ruling would be possibly non-sustainable for the country. This as the Supreme Court decides whether Trump actually had the authority to impose the sweeping tariffs that became a major part of his foreign policy. The justices began hearing arguments on November 5th, and their ruling could permanently reshape how much power a U.S. president has to take economic action under a national emergency. The U.S. Supreme Court has begun hearing two consolidated challenges to Trump's use of emergency powers to slap tariffs on countries around the world. These challenges target Trump's use of a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. The law gives the president broad emergency powers to regulate imports and exports during international crises. But, and this is key, it never mentions the word tariff. That's exactly why petitioners argue Trump went too far. They say the IEPA doesn't authorize blanket tariffs, and that only Congress has the power to impose duties. The two cases now before the court come from a family-owned toy company and a wine importer that also sells women's cycling apparel. Both claim the president violated the law by imposing these emergency tariffs. The lower courts have already ruled against Trump, and now the Supreme Court will make the final call. Under the IEPA, presidents can investigate, block, regulate, direct, compel, prevent, or prohibit the import or export of goods. Trump used that to impose two kinds of tariffs: trafficking tariffs, targeting countries linked to fentanyl entering the U.S., and worldwide or reciprocal tariffs, blanket duties meant to offset trade deficits. In nearly 50 years, no U.S. president has ever used IEPA this way. The only historical comparison comes from President Richard Nixon, who used an older law, the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, to impose a 10% import duty. The implications are huge. If the Supreme Court rules against Trump, the U.S. Treasury might have to refund billions in tariff revenue. Earlier, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently warned on NBC's Meet the Press we would have to give a refund on about half the tariffs, which would be terrible for the Treasury. If the court says it, we'd have to do it. Since Trump rolled out the IEPA tariffs, U.S. Customs and Border Protection data shows the government has collected $90 billion from those duties. In total, including pre-existing tariffs, that number climbs to about $195 billion since his orders began. If Trump wins, it cements the presidency's power to unilaterally shape trade policy under emergency law. If he loses, it would limit executive authority and possibly force massive refunds. Either way, the ruling will redefine how far a U.S. president can go in using emergency powers to reshape global trade. So, should a president be allowed to impose tariffs under emergency powers? Or should that authority stay with Congress? Tell us what you think in the comments and keep watching Mint News.